Before we begin, if this story moves you, if it reminds you of a truth you once buried, stay until the end. Every second of what you're about to hear carries the weight of a lifetime. And when it's over, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to After 60, The Untold Stories, because every voice, no matter how old, deserves to be heard. I was 70 when I finally told the truth. 70. A lifetime of silence, wrapped in polite smiles and half-empty teacups. The kind of truth that burns quietly, like a match you thought you'd blown out decades ago but still smolders beneath the ashes. That night, the rain hadn't stopped for hours. The clock in the hallway ticked with cruel precision, each sound slicing through the silence of the house I'd lived in for more than 40 years. My daughter, Elise, was sitting across from me at the dining table. She had that look, the same one her father used to have when he wanted to believe a lie because it was easier. "I found this in the attic," she said, sliding a yellowed envelope across the table. The paper was soft, almost translucent, like it had been touched by too many ghosts. My breath caught the moment I saw the handwriting. It was his. I hadn't seen that handwriting since 1963. The room seemed to shrink around me. The walls, once filled with family photos and laughter, now felt like witnesses, silent, judgmental, waiting. I reached for the envelope, my hand trembling so violently that my teacup clinked against the saucer. The smell of old paper hit me, and suddenly I wasn't 70 anymore. I was 19, barefoot on the wooden floor of a one-room house in southern Maine, listening to the sound of a train leaving without him. "Elise," I whispered, "where did you find this?" "In a box under the floorboards." "Why didn't you ever tell me about him?" Her voice broke on the last word. "Him." The name I'd buried deeper than any coffin. For decades, I had lied to her, to everyone, even to myself. I told her her father was my only love. I told her we built this family on truth. But that letter was the only piece left of the real story. The candlelight flickered, casting soft gold across her face. For a moment, I saw myself in her, my stubbornness, my fear of being wrong. But she didn't deserve the lie I'd built around her life. "I was going to burn it," I finally said. My voice cracked open, fragile as the paper in my hands. "But I couldn't." "Why?" she asked. "Because I was a coward. Because I loved a man I shouldn't have loved. Because his death was my fault." But I didn't say that, not yet. Instead, I unfolded the letter. Inside was a single line, written in ink that had faded almost to grey. "If you love me, meet me at the pier on August 12th. Don't let them stop you." The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. The pier. The storm. The night that never ended. And suddenly, the truth, the one I had swallowed for half a century, was pressing against my throat, demanding to be spoken. Elise stared at me, waiting. The air was heavy with questions, but I could only whisper one thing. "You were never supposed to find this." The memory returned like an old film reel, flickering and uneven, but painfully vivid. Summer 1963. The air smelled of salt and gasoline, and my hair was shorter than curled by the ocean wind, tangled from long nights on the pier. That's where I met him. His name was James Whitaker. He was 24, a fisherman's son who hated the sea. He used to say, "The ocean takes more than it gives, Marie," and I'd laugh, not understanding what he meant. We were both too young to recognize the kind of love that doesn't bloom, it detonates. That night, the town was holding its annual midsummer dance. Fairy lights strung between the boats, music from a portable radio, the taste of cheap wine on my tongue. I was wearing my mother's blue dress, the one she said made me look too grown for my own good. James showed up in his father's coat, to sizes too big, smelling faintly of tobacco and rain. When he asked me to dance, I said no at first. I remember his grin, half confident, half desperate. He held out his hand and whispered, "If you don't dance with me now, you'll regret it for 60 years. I laughed then. I didn't know how prophetic those words would become. We danced until the record player broke. I can still feel the rough wood beneath my bare feet, the sound of the waves breaking against the hulls, the way his fingers brushed my cheek when the wind picked up. He was leaving the next day, said he'd gotten a job in Boston. He told me he'd come back before the end of summer. He didn't. By September, the postcards stopped. The town whispered. He ran off with a city girl, they said. My father warned me that boy was never yours to keep, but I knew something was wrong. The night he left, there'd been a storm, sudden and violent, and no one had seen his boat since. I went down to the pier every evening after sunset, waiting, praying, whispering his name into the wind. Weeks turned into months. And then, one morning, a letter came. No return address. Just my name, Marie Anderson, written in his hand. Inside, a folded piece of paper with those same words I read to Elise all those years later. If you love me, meet me at the pier on August 12th. Don't let them stop you. But August 12th had already passed. The letter had taken nearly 2 weeks to arrive. And by then everything had already changed. Because I wasn't alone anymore. When I told my parents I was pregnant, my father's face turned to stone. He didn't speak for 3 days. My mother wept as though I had died. You'll ruin us, she said. You'll ruin yourself, and that's when the manipulation began, the slow, suffocating kind that wraps itself around your choices until you forget what freedom feels like. My father arranged for me to marry a man I barely knew. Richard Bennett, wealthy, ambitious, 15 years older than me. I was 19, scared and desperate for forgiveness. My mother told me it was the only way to save what's left of our family name, so I said yes. I wore a white dress that felt like a costume. The church bells rang, the town cheered, and inside me, a storm raged louder than the one that had taken James away. I told myself it was the right thing, that James was gone, that love was a childish dream. But that night, when Richard kissed me for the first time, I knew my heart was still standing on that pier waiting for a man who would never return. And I kept waiting. 4 years. People often imagine that pain fades with time. It doesn't, it simply learns to behave. It hides behind small routines, smiles for photographs, and folds the laundry as if the world hasn't already collapsed. That was my life for the next 50 years, the art of appearing fine. Richard was a man of order and appearance. Everything in our house had its place, our shoes by the door, our smiles at Sunday service, our silence at the dinner table. He was generous in public and cruel in private, never with his hands, but with words sharp enough to leave invisible scars. You should be grateful, he'd say whenever I hesitated. I saved you from disgrace, and I believed him, at least in the beginning. When Elise was born, I tried to fill my heart with her laughter, to love her enough for both her fathers, the one she knew, and the one whose name I could never speak. I poured myself into motherhood, into making the Bennett house look like a home. There were roses in the garden, white curtains by the kitchen window, and a piano I never learned to play. By the time Elise turned 10, Richard had become a local politician. The town adored him. They saw his charm, his donations, his speeches about family values. They didn't see the nights he came home smelling of whiskey and disappointment, or how he'd stand in the doorway of our bedroom, telling me that women like you are lucky to be kept. I used to sit by the window after he fell asleep, listening to the ocean in the distance. Sometimes I imagined James still out there, his boat cutting through the fog, searching for the girl he once promised to meet. The ache never left, it just learned how to breathe quietly. In 1975, Richard bought a larger house. For our image, he said. He filled it with antique furniture and empty space. He built a life where I existed as decoration, well-dressed, well-behaved, well-silent. The only rebellion I allowed myself was keeping that old letter, hidden beneath the floorboards, under a loose plank in the attic. I touch it sometimes when the loneliness became unbearable, and whisper, I didn't forget you. The years moved like ghosts. Birthdays, funerals, anniversaries all blurred into the same polite routine. I became skilled at pretending. People said, "You and Richard are the perfect couple." I smiled. That was my talent, smiling. But the truth always finds a way to resurface. It started small, like a crack in glass. Elise once asked, when she was 16, "Why don't you ever talk about how you and Dad met?" I laughed it off, said, "It's not that interesting." She believed me. Then, one winter evening in 1981, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, again. The handwriting wasn't James's, it was shakier, older but familiar enough to stop my breath. Inside, a single line, "He didn't drown. He was taken." My hands went cold. My first instinct was to burn it, but I couldn't. Something in me buried for years stirred awake. That night, I couldn't sleep. I heard every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind. I looked at Richard beside me and wondered what secrets he might be keeping. By morning, I had convinced myself it was a cruel prank. No one else could have known about James. No one. But the thought festered, a quiet infection in the back of my mind. I began to notice small things. The way Richard's voice tightened when the phone rang late at night, the way he locked his study when he left the house. Once, I found an old photograph in one of his drawers, a younger Richard shaking hands with James's father, the caption reading, "Whitaker Fisheries, 1963. My blood turned to ice. That was the year James disappeared. I realized then that the story I had been forced to live, the life built for appearances, was standing on a foundation of lies far deeper than my own. And I began to wonder, what if James never left me by choice? What if he was never lost to the sea at all? I didn't sleep for 3 nights after finding that photograph. Every sound in the house made my heart pound. Richard's slow footsteps in the hallway, the ticking clock in the kitchen, the wind pressing against the windows. I began living in a constant state of quiet panic, pretending to be the same obedient wife while my mind unraveled behind the mask. By the 4th day, I couldn't take it anymore. Richard left early for a council meeting, and I went straight to his study. I'd never dared to step inside without permission before. It was his private office, the one rule of the house I never broke. But that morning, something inside me broke first. I searched everything, drawers, cabinets, folders marked with neat dates and names. My hands shook as I flipped through old files until I found one labeled Whitaker Deal minus 1963. I hesitated before opening it, afraid of what I might find. Inside, there were several letters, contracts, and one old black and white photograph of a construction site by the docks. And there, standing at the edge of the frame, was James Whitaker. He was alive. At least he had been after he supposedly disappeared. The documents showed financial exchanges between Richard Bennett and the Whitaker family's company. Large sums of money, dates that matched the days after James went missing. My vision blurred. I could barely breathe. I sat there for what felt like hours, piecing together fragments of a puzzle I didn't know existed. The truth was forming, horrible and heavy. Richard had done something to make James disappear. I needed answers. That night, after Richard came home, I watched him more closely than ever before. His smile at dinner, his casual jokes about the mayor's incompetence, they all seemed rehearsed, hollow. I asked, as casually as I could, "Do you remember the Whitakers? The family from the harbour?" He froze for a fraction of a second. Then, with a practiced smile, said, "Of course. Good people. Shame what happened to that boy. His tone cold, dismissive, confirmed everything. After dinner, I pretended to sleep. At midnight, I heard him leave the bedroom and walk to his study. The door creaked softly, then closed. I slipped out of bed and followed, barefoot on the cold floor. Through the crack of the door, I saw him burning papers in the fireplace. The smell of smoke mixed with the scent of whiskey. My heart hammered as I realized what he was destroying. The folder. The proof. I pushed the door open. "Why, Richard?" My voice was shaking, but I didn't care anymore. He turned, startled, then composed himself instantly. Marie, go back to bed. Tell me what you did to him. He didn't answer. Just stared at me, that politician's face smooth, emotionless. You don't want to dig up the past. It's not good for you, not good for me. You took everything from me, he sighed, walked toward me slowly, like he was approaching a frightened child. You were young. You don't understand how the world works. That boy, he made mistakes. Got involved with people he shouldn't have. I did what needed to be done. What did you do? I screamed. Tell me. He stopped inches from me, his voice a low whisper. I made sure he'd never come back. It felt like the room collapsed around me. I couldn't breathe. The man I had spent my life beside, the man I had served, obeyed, and protected had stolen the only pure thing I ever had. Richard looked almost sorry for a moment. You were better off not knowing, he said, turning away. I left the room, shaking. For the first time, I didn't cry. Something inside me went quiet to quiet. I knew then that my silence had protected monsters. The next morning, I packed a small suitcase. Some clothes, the old letter, and the photograph he hadn't burned. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay there. I left before sunrise. The road stretched out empty before me, and the sea wind followed like an old memory. I was 62 years old, and for the first time since I was a girl, I was free. But freedom has a cost. And I would soon learn that the truth, when buried for decades, has a way of destroying everything in its path. The ocean looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was me who had grown larger with age and grief, or maybe time had stripped the shore of its innocence. The harbour town was nearly unrecognizable. New buildings where the old cannery used to be, paved streets where there had once been sand. But the smell was the same, salt, rust, and the faint sweetness of seaweed drying under the morning sun. It had been 52 years since the day James vanished. I parked my car by the docks and sat for a while, watching the gulls circle the grey waves. My hands trembled against the steering wheel. Every sound, the cry of a bird, the clatter of chains, pulled me back to that night when I was 18, standing right here, waiting for a boy who never came. I walked toward the pier where fishermen were hauling in their morning catch. The air was heavy with the smell of diesel and fish. Faces turned to glance at me, curious, polite, then quickly looked away. I wasn't from here anymore. I was just another ghost returning to the place where something terrible had happened. The first person I spoke to was an old man mending nets. His hair was silver, his skin burned and folded from years of salt and sun. Excuse me, I said softly. Do you know what happened to the Whittaker family? He looked up, squinting. The Whittakers? Been gone a long time, lady. After James disappeared, his father sold the boats. Some say he went mad. Moved inland, died a few years later, and James, he shrugged. The sea takes who it wants. Always has. That night, I checked into a small inn by the coast. The owner, a kind woman named Nora, recognized the name instantly when I asked about the Whittakers. I was a girl when it happened, she said. My father used to work for them. People said James found out something he shouldn't have, and then he was gone. But nobody ever proved anything. The Bennets were powerful then. Still are. I froze. The Bennets, she nodded. Richard Bennett. You mean to tell me you don't know that name? His company bought half this town after the Whittakers went under. He practically rebuilt the harbour. The words hit me like cold rain. Richard had erased the Whittakers from history and built his empire on their ruin. Later that night, unable to sleep, I walked along the beach. The moon was full, silver light spilling across the tide. I followed the shoreline until I reached the rocks near the old lighthouse. It was abandoned now, boarded up, the path overgrown. But something inside me told me to keep going. The wind howled as I climbed the path, clutching my coat tight. When I reached the door, I noticed something strange, a faint light flickering through the cracks, like a candle burning inside. I hesitated. then pushed the door open. The air inside smelled of damp wood and salt. On the floor, half buried under dust, was a pile of old crates. I brushed one off and saw the faded words Whitaker Fisheries. My chest tightened. They'd hidden everything here: equipment, records, names long forgotten. Among the papers, one small envelope caught my eye. The handwriting was fragile but unmistakable. For Marie, my knees nearly gave out. I tore it open with trembling hands. Inside, a letter dated 1963. Marie, if you're reading this, it means something went wrong. They found out what I was going to tell you. Your father isn't who you think he is. And Bennett, he's dangerous. Don't trust him. I'm going away for a while. I'll come back for you when it's safe. Please don't believe what they'll say about me. Whatever happens, remember, I never left you. James. The paper slipped from my fingers. My heart felt like it had been ripped open all over again. All these years I had lived under Richard's roof, his rules, his lies, while the man I loved had tried to save me. I didn't notice the sound of footsteps until it was too late. Still chasing ghosts, Marie, I turned. Richard stood in the doorway, older now, but still carrying that same arrogant calm. His eyes gleamed in the candlelight. How did you? I've been watching you since you left, he said, stepping closer. You should have stayed quiet. The wind slammed against the walls of the lighthouse, rattling the old beams. I took a step back, clutching James's letter to my chest. You took everything from me, I whispered. Richard smiled, a cruel, tired smile. No. I gave you a life. You just never appreciated it. You killed him, he didn't deny it. He was a problem. And I solve problems, my vision blurred with tears. You don't get to rewrite my story anymore. For the first time in 50 years, I didn't feel afraid. I felt furious. I reached for the lantern on the floor, the one that had lit the room, and threw it hard against the wall. The flame burst to life, licking the old wooden boards. Richard cursed and backed away. Marie, what are you doing? If you're still here. You felt it too, the pain of being unheard, unseen, forgotten. Tell us in the comments what this moment means to you. Your words might be the one thing someone out there needs to read tonight. And don't forget, every story we share keeps another soul from being silent. Like, comment, and subscribe to keep these voices alive. Finishing it. The fire spread quickly, eating through the rot and dust. Smoke filled the air. I ran past him, clutching the letter, stumbling down the rocks as the lighthouse erupted behind me. By the time I reached the sand, the entire structure was ablaze, a beacon of truth finally burning through the lies. I stood there until the roof caved in and the flames began to die. I was 70 years old, and I was done being afraid. I drove through the night, the road stretching endlessly under the weight of what I'd just done. The sky was bruised purple before dawn, the first light bleeding over the horizon as I reached the city limits. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. The smell of smoke clung to my hair, to my clothes, to everything I owned. I didn't know where else to go, so I went to the only place that still connected me to life, my daughter's house. Elise. I hadn't seen her in months. We'd grown distant, the way mothers and daughters sometimes do when too much has been left unsaid. Her porch light flickered when I rang the bell. It was 5:12 a.m. She opened the door in her robe, her eyes widening the moment she saw me. Mom, what happened to you? I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, exhausted, holding that one letter, James's letter, crumpled and stained in my hands. I need to tell you something, I whispered. And you're not going to believe me. She brought me inside, sat me down on a couch. The house smelled like coffee and fresh linen, so normal it almost hurt. She poured me a cup and waited, worry etched all over her face. Elise, I began, your father, Richard, he wasn't who he said he was. Her expression hardened instantly. Mom, if this is another one of your, please. Just listen, my voice cracked. Before I met him, I was in love with someone else. His name was James Whittaker. We were supposed to run away together in 1963, but he disappeared. Everyone said he drowned. I believed it too until now. I placed the letter on the table. She hesitated, then picked it up, her fingers tracing the faded ink. He wrote this for you. I nodded. And Richard, he was the reason James never came back. Her head snapped up. You're saying Dad? Yes, my throat burned as I said it out loud. He had him killed, or worse. I found proof. I confronted him. And now the lighthouse, the place where it happened, it's gone. I burned it down. For a long moment, there was silence. Only the ticking clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Elise stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Mom, do you hear yourself? You're talking about arson. About murder. Dad's been dead for 3 years, I know, I said. But that doesn't erase what he did. She rubbed her temples. You're 70 years old. You can't just, Mom. Do you have any idea how this sounds? I looked at her, my daughter, the product of a life built on lies. She looked so much like him, but when she frowned, when her eyes softened in confusion, I could almost see James. The resemblance cut deep. I kept the truth from you because I wanted to protect you, I said quietly. But secrets like these don't protect anyone. They poison everything. She folded her arms, unsure whether to comfort me or call someone. You really believe this, don't you? I handed her the photograph, the one I'd found in Richard's drawer. Her breath caught. That's Dad. And who's the other man? James's father, I said. The day after he vanished, she didn't say anything for a long time. Then she looked at me and whispered, What do you want to do now? Tell the truth, I said simply. All of it, so we did. That afternoon, we went to the local police department. The officer at the desk looked skeptical when I told him my story, but when I handed him the letter, the photo, and what little evidence survived the fire, something in his expression shifted. He called in a detective. Questions followed. Then paperwork. Then the word homicide was whispered more than once. I told them everything. Every lie, every bruise that wasn't physical, every moment Richard had twisted my silence into obedience. Elise sat beside me, her hand trembling in mine. When it was over, the detective leaned back, exhaling slowly. Mrs. Bennett, if what you're saying is true, this could reopen a case that's been closed for over 50 years. Then open it, I said. He studied me for a moment. You know what this could mean for your family's name, for your daughter's reputation. My family's name was never real, I interrupted. But the truth is, we left the station in silence. The sun was low now, gold and forgiving. Elise walked beside me, quieter than usual. As we reached the car, she finally asked, Did you ever stop loving him? James, I smiled sadly, no. And that's what kept me alive all these years. She nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. I believe you, Mom. The words broke something open inside me. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear them. That night, I couldn't sleep again, but not from fear this time. From release. For the first time since I was a child, the house didn't feel haunted. The air was lighter. The ghosts had names now. But I also knew it wasn't over. The truth has a way of echoing long after it's spoken. And some echoes still had to be answered. The town hadn't changed much in appearance, but it felt different now, like the air itself carried a secret everyone was trying not to breathe in. News travels fast in small places, and my confession was wildfire. Within a week, reporters started circling like gulls over dead fish. The widow of Richard Bennett breaks her silence after 50 years, one headline read. Another called me the woman who burned the past. I hated the attention. I didn't want fame. I wanted peace. But peace doesn't come easily when the truth starts to unravel what others built on lies. The investigation moved quickly. The police exhumed old records, reopened the Whittaker file, and even located a few surviving members of James's family. The first time I saw his niece, an older woman now, Probably in her 50s, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "We always knew something wasn't right." The detectives confirmed what I'd already feared. Financial records, land transfers, missing logs all traced back to Richard. It turned out his company had used the Whitakers' boats to smuggle money during construction deals. James must have found out. That's why he vanished. When they told me they'd never found his body, I felt two conflicting things at once: agony and hope. Agony that he might have suffered. Hope that maybe, somehow, he hadn't died the way they thought. But deep down, I knew the truth: he was gone long before I ever found that letter. The town council tried to stay quiet, tried to sweep it under the rug. Richard had been a pillar of the community, after all. Donations, speeches, plaques on public buildings. They wanted to protect the image of the man who'd ruined my life, but I wouldn't let them. When the hearing date was set, a public inquest into the Bennett estate and its connections to the Whitaker disappearance, I knew I had to testify. Elise begged me not to. "Mom, they'll tear you apart," she said. "They'll say you're senile, that you imagined it all." "I don't care what they say," I told her. "I lived my whole life being silent. If I die speaking, at least it will be the truth." The day of the hearing, I wore a simple black dress. No makeup, no jewelry. I didn't want to look like the grieving widow of a wealthy man. I wanted to look like what I was, a woman who had survived him. The room was full: journalists, townspeople, faces I didn't recognize, faces that once smiled politely at me during charity galas. And on the front row, Elise sat clutching her notebook, her eyes locked on me. When the judge asked me to speak, my voice shook for only the first few seconds. After that, it was steady. "I was 8 years old when I learned that silence could protect monsters," I began. "I was 18 when I learned that love could get you killed. And I was 70 when I finally learned that truth, no matter how long it takes, always rises like the tide." The room went still. You could hear every breath. I told them everything. The night James disappeared, the deal between Richard and the Whitakers, the decades of manipulation and control. Every word I spoke was a small piece of my life being returned to me. When I finished, the judge looked at me for a long moment and said softly, "Mrs. Bennett, thank you for your courage." There was no dramatic applause. Just quiet. Heavy, honest quiet. And for the first time in half a century, I felt seen, not as a wife, not as a widow, but as myself. After the hearing, Elise hugged me outside the courthouse. Her face was wet with tears. "You did it, Mom. You actually did it." I smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart. We did." The investigation stretched on for months. They found more evidence: hidden accounts, sealed documents, even testimonies from men who had worked for Richard in the 60s. His empire began to crumble, piece by piece. Streets that once bore his name were quietly renamed. His statue outside City Hall was removed at dawn, without ceremony. Justice didn't feel like victory. It felt like breathing after years underwater. It hurt. But it was clean. One afternoon, a young journalist came to interview me for a feature called "Women Who Broke Their Silence." She was polite, nervous. Near the end, she asked, "If you could go back, Mrs. Bennett, would you change anything?" I thought about it for a long time. About James, about the girl I used to be, about all the things I lost. Then I said, yes. I'd speak sooner. She smiled sadly. "Do you think it would have changed anything?" I looked out the window. The sky was overcast, but the light was gentle. Maybe not. But it would have changed me. That night, Elise came by with dinner. We sat on the porch, listening to the wind move through the trees. For once, we didn't talk about the past. We just existed in the quiet truth of the present. Before she left, she turned and asked, "What now?" I laughed softly. "Now. Now I live, and for the first time since I was 8 years old, I meant it. The day the investigation officially closed was the day the silence inside me finally broke. The detectives said there was enough evidence to prove Richard Bennett's role in the disappearance, though too much time had passed for any formal conviction. Justice delayed, they called it. I called it truth, finally breathing. For a while, I thought that would be the end of it. But closure isn't neat. It doesn't arrive like a letter in the mail. It leaks slowly, in the quiet hours between waking and sleep, when the ghosts return to whisper unfinished words. It happened one morning when I was sorting through a box Elise had brought from the old house papers, photographs, old receipts, things I thought were long gone. Among them was a small envelope, brittle with age, sealed in red wax. There was no name on it. Just 2 letters, faded but clear enough to stop my breath. M.W. Marie Whitaker. No one had called me that since James. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single folded page, the ink faint but still legible. My hands trembled as I began to read. Marie, I don't know if this will ever reach you. If you're reading it, then something went wrong, and I didn't make it back. There's so much I wish I'd said when we still had time. I wanted you to know that the life they forced you into isn't the one you deserved. Don't let them turn you into what they want. Don't let them silence you. Speak, even if no one listens. Because one day, someone will. If I don't return, live. Live enough for both of us, Jay. The paper blurred as tears fell onto it. I pressed it to my chest and closed my eyes, as if somehow, across all those years, he could still feel me there. Elise found me like that, sitting on the floor, surrounded by the remnants of my past. She knelt beside me. Is that from him? I nodded. He wrote it before he disappeared. She read it silently, her eyes glistening. When she finished, she whispered, "He wanted you to live, Mom." "And you did." I shook my head. "No, I survived." "That's not the same thing." That night, I went back to the sea dot alone. The air was cool, sharp with the scent of salt and the memory of everything that once was. The lighthouse was gone, only a skeleton of blackened stones remained, but I could still hear its ghost in the distance. I sat on the sand and unfolded James's letter again. The tide crept closer, the edges of the paper trembling in the breeze. I could almost hear his voice reading the words, soft and certain. Don't let them silence you. The sun began to rise, spilling gold across the waves. I held the letter to the light and whispered. I spoke, James. They finally heard me. Then, with shaking hands, I let the paper fall into the water. It floated for a moment, a fragile piece of the past, before the tide claimed it. I stayed until the horizon swallowed it whole. When I turned to leave, I saw Elise standing a few yards away, her coat fluttering in the wind. I thought you might be here, she said softly. I smiled faintly. I couldn't say goodbye to him in that house. It had to be here. She came closer and slipped her arm through mine. Then maybe now you can say hello to yourself. We stood there together, watching the sea smooth over everything it had taken. For once, the waves didn't sound like ghosts. They sounded like forgiveness. Weeks passed. The press moved on. The town forgot, as towns always do. But I didn't. I began writing again, not letters this time, but stories my own, the ones no one ever asked to hear. Elise convinced me to send one to a small local magazine. They published it under the title The Girl No One Believed. I didn't write for revenge. I wrote so that someone, somewhere, might read it and decide to speak sooner than I did. One morning, months later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from a woman in Montana. She wrote, "Your story gave me the courage to leave my husband. Thank you for reminding me that it's never too late to be free." I cried harder reading that than I did the day I burned the lighthouse. Because for the first time, I understood what James had meant. Live enough for both of us. And somehow, after 70 years of silence, I was finally doing it. It began as a single notebook, leather-bound, plain, something Elise gave me so you can keep writing. Mom, I didn't think much of it at first. The story I'd already told, the one that went to the magazine, felt like the last thing I had left to say. But words have a way of haunting you. Once you let them out, they come back with company. So I started to write again. At first, it was just fragments. A memory of a woman at church whose bruises everyone pretended not to see. A girl from the neighborhood who disappeared after speaking too loud, too soon. And then stories from letters that began arriving, one by one, from strangers. Each envelope carried the same echo. I thought I was alone until I read yours. I couldn't ignore them. So I wrote. Every night, after the world went quiet, I sat at my kitchen table under the soft hum of a single lamp and transcribed their voices into my notebook. The pages filled faster than I could keep up. The ink ran where my tears fell, but I never stopped. Because for the first time, the silence that once crushed me was now filled with voices that mattered. Elise watched this transformation quietly. One evening, she came into the kitchen and said, "You're building something, you know that." I looked up from the notebook. "I'm just writing." "No, Mom," she said. "You're giving women back their names." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Because she was right. Every story I wrote wasn't just mine, it was a thread in a larger tapestry of pain, strength, and survival. I decided to give it a name, The Book of the Unheard. Months passed. Then a year. My health began to falter, but I didn't mind. There was a strange kind of peace in knowing that something inside me was finally finding shape. When the book was complete, Elise helped me send it to a small independent publisher. I didn't expect anything from it. I only wanted the stories to live somewhere outside of me. But 3 months later, a letter arrived. The editor wrote, "Your manuscript moved us to tears. We would be honored to publish it." Stories like these deserve to be heard. The day I held the printed copy in my hands, aged fingers trembling on the cover that bore my name, I realized that even after all the years of silence, fear, and loss, something beautiful had survived. I visited James's grave for the first time in decades. The wind was cold, the sky open and endless. I placed the book on the stone and whispered, "You told me to live enough for both of us." I did. And now they will too. Tears blurred the marble, and I smiled through them. Because for once, the ache didn't feel like grief. It felt like purpose. Elise filmed a small video of me reading the first page of the book for her online channel. She uploaded it quietly, without telling me. The next morning, she woke me up in tears. "Mom, the video has over 1 million views. People are writing from all over the world. Messages flooded in. This story healed something in me. I finally told my daughter the truth. Thank you for being brave. For a long time, I had thought truth was meant to destroy. But now I understood, truth doesn't break us. It builds us differently." As the days passed, Elise convinced me to record more, my memories, my thoughts, my laughter. "People need to see that strength doesn't always look young," she said. So I did. And somehow, at 70, I became a storyteller 2000s. The last time I sat in front of the camera, the afternoon light poured through the curtains like honey, soft, golden, forgiving. Elise adjusted the tripod the way she always did, fussing over the focus even though I told her not to. "It doesn't need to be perfect," I said with a small laugh. "Neither of us ever were." But she just smiled and said, "That's exactly why people listen to you, Mom." I looked at the blinking red light. For a moment, it felt like looking into someone's eyes, thousands of them, all waiting for me to speak. My heart thumped against my ribs, and my fingers, thin and veined, rested on the edge of the table where so many of my secrets had once been buried. I took a deep breath. "My name is Marie," I began, my voice quieter than I remembered it being in my youth. "And I've spent most of my life running from the truth. I thought silence was safer. That if I didn't speak about the things that broke me, they couldn't break anyone else. But silence doesn't protect us. It only protects the ones who hurt us. I paused, the words trembling in the air. I could feel the weight of every woman who had written to me, every girl who had swallowed her voice, every memory that still hid in the corners of dimly lit rooms. I was 8 when I first tried to tell the truth, I said softly, but no one believed me. And so I learned to disappear, to make myself small, polite, agreeable. It took me 70 years to finally understand that silence isn't peace. It's punishment. The camera caught the shimmer in my eyes, the thin smile that came after years of carrying what shouldn't have been mine to carry. I used to think forgiveness meant pretending it never happened, that I had to erase the pain to move on. But forgiveness, I smiled faintly, shaking my head. Forgiveness is simply choosing not to let the past own you anymore. I could feel Elise watching me from behind the camera, her breath catching the same way mine once had when I was her age. I wanted to leave her something, not money, not things, but understanding. You see, I said, truth doesn't age. It waits. It waits until your hands are steady enough, or your heart is tired enough, to finally open the door and let it out. It doesn't care how long you've been afraid. It just wants to be free. I leaned forward then, speaking as if to one person, the woman, the man, the lonely soul watching on the other side of that lens. If you're hearing this, I said, and there's something you've been holding inside, tell it. Write it, whisper it if you have to. But don't let it die with you. The world doesn't need more secrets. It needs more voices. The light was dimming now. Elise's shadow moved closer, her hand trembling as she touched my shoulder. I looked up and smiled. You can stop recording, sweetheart, I whispered. But she didn't. The red light kept blinking, capturing the silence that followed, the kind of silence that wasn't heavy anymore, but peaceful. I sat there for a long while, watching the sun sink below the horizon, thinking about James, about my younger self, about the girl no one believed and the woman who finally found her voice. And when the camera finally clicked off, I felt it, the quiet, certain knowing that I had said everything I needed to say. 2 weeks later, Elise uploaded that final video with the title, She Was 70 When She Finally Told the Truth. It went viral overnight. People shared it, cried over it, wrote their own confessions beneath it. And somewhere in the endless sea of comments, someone wrote, I believed her, just for words. But for me, it was everything I had waited a lifetime to hear. If this story touched your heart, let it echo, share it, write your own truth below. Somewhere, someone is waiting to hear your words, just like she waited her whole life to be believed. Comment what part spoke to you most, tap if you felt her courage. And subscribe to After 60, the untold stories, because here every truth finds its voice.